What's going on, everybody? Welcome back to the channel. Hope you're all doing well, and thanks for taking the time out of your day to join me here once again, where we're going to continue on my coverage of the Halloween franchise. If you guys are just now hopping in, I have covered the first 6 films in the franchise, and now I have 2 left to cover in the original timeline or the original release of films. I have also covered the Michael Myers Rob Zombie remakes, as well as the newest Halloween films that kind of wrap things up, brought back Jamie Lee Curtis once again, and all that jazz. But today we're going to be talking about the first film that brought Jamie Lee Curtis back into the franchise 20 years after the release of the original Halloween, and that film is called Halloween H20 20 Years Later. Directed by Steve Miner, this film stars people like Jamie Lee Curtis, Josh Hartnett, Adam Arkin, Michelle Williams, and more. And as I just mentioned, this is the first return of Jamie Lee Curtis to the franchise, which was not initially the plan of this film. This film came out after Scream and things like I Know What You Did Last Summer had kind of changed things up in the slasher horror genre, and so they actually had people involved in those films kind of get involved with different rewrites and storytelling in this one, and it was initially meant to play off of some of the events of the previous films. Now, if you watched my review for the last one, The Curse of Michael Myers, I broke down the differences between the theatrical cut of that film and the producer's cut and how widely different they are narratively, but how the producer's cut adds in this entirely big cult of thorn element where Michael Myers is essentially a pawn of this cult and he's controlled by these magical runes, and it's a whole element of lore that a lot of people did not like, and it's easily one of the most hated films in the franchise. And initially this film was meant to play off of the events that we had seen built up in the previous films, but instead it chooses to erase those films, pretty much making this a direct sequel to the original 2 Halloween films that starred Jamie Lee Curtis, as we see her here in a new setting, in a new story, following up what happened there, as she's been fearful of Michael Myers appearing once again. But as usual, let's get into what this film is all about first, and then we'll get into my thoughts on the film. 20 years after the events of the original Halloween from 1978 and Halloween 2, Laurie Strode is living under a new identity as Carrie Tate, the headmistress of a private Northern California boarding school. Traumatized by her past and suffering from alcoholism and PTSD, Laurie struggles to maintain a sense of normalcy while raising her 17-year-old son, John, played by Josh Hartnett, in his first role ever on screen. When Halloween night arrives, Michael Myers, long presumed dead, tracks down Laurie to the secluded school after killing Nurse Marion, who actually appeared in the first 2 films and was played by the same actress. Once Michael breaches the school's security, Laurie is forced to confront the boogeyman who's haunted her for decades. The story builds to a climactic showdown between Laurie and Michael, culminating in one of the most iconic The story builds to a climactic showdown between Laurie and Michael, culminating in one of the most iconic finales in the series, where Laurie decapitates Michael Myers with an axe after a car crash, seemingly ending the nightmare once and for all, at least for then. And honestly, after having revisited this film for the first time in many years, I actually had a really good time with it, especially with the last taste in my mouth of this franchise being The Curse of Michael Myers, which was not really a great film to rewatch. It wasn't good whether you watched the theatrical cut or the producer's cut. And a couple of notable things to mention about this one is that if you saw my review for The Curse of Michael Myers, you'll know that Donald Pleasance unfortunately passed away while they were doing the reshoots for that film, so he wasn't able to even do the reshoots for that film, and nor was he able to, of course, appear in this film that came out 3 years later. So this is the first film in the franchise to not have Dr. Loomis chasing after Michael Myers, which is, of course, a shame, but Donald Pleasance's feeling and spirit is definitely present in this film, and they show Dr. Loomis through images as well as things like newspaper clippings throughout the course of the film, and there are moments where they repeat lines that his character has said to Michael Myers or about Michael Myers in the previous film. So his soul is definitely here in the film. Of course, Jamie Lee Curtis comes back. That is the big selling point of this film, and this film still plays within the world where Michael Myers is her brother, which of course was the setup that you mainly get in the second film. But if you've seen the newest 3 films, they did erase that and made it so that he's not actually her brother, which it makes the newer films more of a direct sequel to the original film. But this one here, Halloween H20 20 years later, is more of a direct sequel to the first 2 films, which does still keep intact the fact that Michael and Laurie are siblings. I know, It's confusing. Quite frankly, I think this franchise has done the general audience a disservice because there are films that are just flat out omitted from being part of the storytelling, and I don't think that everybody knows all about those little details. I think it's incredibly confusing, and just the fact that we have a franchise where you have an original film called Halloween, then you have a remake that's called Halloween, which makes sense, but then you also have a sequel that came out in the late 2010s, early 2020s, a franchise there that starts with a new set of movies that the original one of that is called Halloween, but that's a direct sequel to the original Halloween that omits Halloween 2, and then there's also a Halloween 2 that's part of Rob Zombie's remakes. It's pretty confusing, and so some of those details do get lost in the mix. And one detail that's completely eradicated again in the newer films is the fact that Laurie has a son in this movie, a 17-year-old son who's played by Josh Hartnett, and this is actually his first time ever on screen. And yeah, Josh Hartnett is an actor I've really enjoyed over the years. He did take a break from Hollywood for quite some time, but in recent years has returned. One of the biggest returns from him was last year's Trap, M. Night Shyamalan's film, as well as appearing in a film earlier this year that the name is escaping me right now, but I did not get around to checking it out. But he's an actor I've always enjoyed as he's gotten better and better, and I think he's solid enough here. He's giving definitely a performance that feels like a first time, and it's interesting that Josh Hartnett's first time was in this film, and just 3 years prior, Paul Rudd would appear in Curse of Michael Myers for his first time on screen. So this franchise has definitely introduced us to a lot of actors for the very first time. You also have some names like Michelle Williams in this film, as well as Josh Hartnett's love interest in the film, who of course has gone on to become an incredibly successful actress as well. And another thing to mention, though it is absolutely not consequential, is that in the very opening of this film, though he does end up getting killed, you have a young Joseph Gordon-Levitt in here as well as a character of Jimmy, who helps the nurse at the very beginning. Yeah, not really a big part of the film, but it was cool. I kind of forgot that he was in this film, and it's always cool to see an actor who's gone on to become so successful at such a young age in a film like this. And overall, a lot of this film does feel like pretty typical slasher affair. However, I do think with the things like Scream or I Know What You Did Last Summer kind of becoming a bigger name at the time and kind of revitalizing the slasher genre and making it feel like more than just generic slashers, I think that this film does a good job of differentiating itself from some of the previous installments that had come before it, as well as just a slew of other slasher franchises like the Friday the 13th franchise, the Nightmare on Elm Street franchise, and the Child's Play franchise that maybe had some sequels that started to feel like they were just a little bit in the run-of-the-mill category. And I think that this film feels like it had an agenda to kind of revitalize things, and more than anything, put Laurie Strode at the center of it. Or in the case of this film, she's known as Carrie Tate, as she of course has changed her name so that Michael Myers could not find her. And so I think that this film does a good job more than anything of putting her at the center, really exploring her a little bit more as a character, how the events of the past have really affected her. Of course, in the newer films, we see that she's like a lot older, she's a lot more like prepared, she's got weaponry, she's got traps set up for him. That all honestly end up meaning nothing when you get to the finale of that movie, but she's in a completely different place there, whereas here she's just trying to live a normal life, and she's struggling with PTSD, and she's keeping that part of her past hidden. And I thought that, Jamie Lee Curtis is just a great actress in this film. I thought she was great in all the films she's been in this franchise, but here she really showcases a lot of vulnerability as somebody who is living with a lot of pain from the past, but trying to do the best she can to be a mom in this story. And one thing that's interesting about this film is that while there are a couple of Michael Myers kills kind of sprinkled in the earlier part of the film, most of this film is really kind of almost like a Jaws situation where Michael Myers isn't really present throughout all of it. A lot of it is sometimes in her mind, or we're seeing sequences where we see Michael making his way to Laurie, but there isn't a whole lot of slashing until the final bit of this film. So it feels like Michael is more of a looming presence than he is a all-out slasher in the film, which I'm sure turns some people off. But for me, as somebody who likes story first, I like that this film took its time to spend time with Laurie Strode and her son and really expand upon that storyline before we start to see people getting offed. Once people do start to get off, it is pretty typical slasher affair. I don't necessarily know that this has the best kills in the franchise. Michael Myers is stabbing people. There's a couple of moves he's done in previous films, like stabbing somebody in the back and then lifting them up, only for them to kind of be gyrating and struggling. A couple of throat slits and different things like that. I can't necessarily say that Michael Myers was going all out in crazy ways in terms of the slashing kills here, but when it comes down to the musical score, the way that this film is directed, and the overall story, while again, it does dip its toes feels into generic at times, it's ultimately a lot of fun to watch, and I think that Jamie Lee Curtis is a huge reason that this film is engaging. It does feel like it's a legacy sequel before we were even calling films like this legacy sequels, where we're able to see a character return from the original films and really expand upon it, really showcasing what the films in between the ones that she was in and now were lacking. I think that this film absolutely showcases that Jamie Lee Curtis, in a lot of ways outside of Michael Myers, is the heart and soul of the Halloween franchise. And revisiting this, I had forgotten how much I enjoyed this film, because when you look at the newest films, there are elements about this film that I enjoy more, even so, than the newer films that they've done that have had maybe some better, special effects, better kills, better practical effects, and all that stuff. There are just elements about the way that they handle Laurie here that I really enjoyed, despite some of that 90s cheese, especially in attire, hairstyles, and some of the dialogue. And in terms of some of the things that don't work in this film and some of the cheesy elements, one of the things is the Michael Myers mask in this film. If you've seen the film, you'll know that they actually use several different masks in the film. Sometimes they look okay, sometimes they look flat out awful, and there are also moments in this film where there is a CGI mask used because obviously they needed to kind of fix things at certain moments in post. And so some of the moments of Michael Myers in this film definitely do look goofy, whether it's the face mold or the hair. There are times where Michael Myers just looks goofy. And I think that the mask kind of sometimes show too much of his eyes or the section around his eyes, which doesn't make him look all that scary. I also don't think that they got an actor who was as imposing in size as Michael Myers, so he does kind of feel like a small guy here. Outside of that, you also have people like LL Cool J in this film, who plays the security guard to the school, but also an aspiring romantic novelist who is reading off his novels to his girlfriend over the phone when Michael Myers appears. Throughout all this, in an attempt to try to save the day, he ends up getting himself shot. You think he's dead because it looks like he got shot in the head, only for him to appear near the end, right before Laurie Strode is able to strike the final blow on Michael Myers in the final showdown, which ends up, leading to the fact that Michael is, of course, not actually dead. And this leads to the actual finale of Laurie Strode and Michael going head to head, where she eventually decapitates him. And that's a pretty great sequence. I think that the way that the film ends, there is a touch of that 90s cheese to it, but it is enjoyable. But yeah, overall, in terms of things I didn't like, obviously the mask, I think there is some cheese in there. LL Cool J's element, I don't necessarily know that we needed, but I think it kind of adds to that 90s cheese. And outside of that, I would say that there are just, a number of characters that don't really matter much. There's a guidance counselor in the film that is a love interest of sorts to Laurie Strode's character, who just has some of the cheesiest dialogue in the film that really takes you out of some of these moments. But outside of that, I honestly found H20 to be a lot of fun to go back and revisit. I think this is the film that a lot of people may not remember being as good in the franchise as it is, because the Halloween franchise has a lot of hits and misses, if you ask me. There are certain films in this franchise that are really great, and then there are certain films in this franchise, especially a lot of the sequels, that are pretty lackluster. And this is one of those that I think is kind of a gem in the mix of it. And I think maybe it's a little bit of a hindsight thing too, kind of seeing a lot of the films that have come out since this film. I think that this film did what a legacy sequel should do at the time, before we were even calling these legacy sequels. And all in all, I had a good time revisiting this one. So the question is to you guys, where does this rank for you in the Halloween franchise? Do you guys enjoy this film? Do you not enjoy this film? What's your favorite or least favorite element of it? Whatever the case may be, leave any and all comments down below, and I'll see you guys in the next one. Bye-bye.